Hey guys, and welcome to the Basic Latina podcast, an intimate conversation with friends about love, life, wellness, and everything in between. I am recording in my room, which is halfway packed up. For those of you who know me personally and follow me on social media, know that I am finally moving out of my mom's house. I have been living with my mom for the past 2 years, almost three. I live with her to save money. Then I lost my job, got a new job eventually, but then my dad got sick and I stayed with my mom to help her. I say that because I don't need to explain myself, but I know a lot of people wonder like how are you a grown woman with all of these credentials and you still live with your parents, which I think is such a silly thing to say to someone when I'm a single person with no kids. So living with my mom is probably like a really smart thing to do because I'm saving money. And two, Connecticut is a really expensive state to live in. So um, I'm actually really blessed that I have the means now to live by myself. And it's a I'm at a really transitional place in my life right now because the podcast is ending. It is going to be the end of season one. I can't believe these past 6 months went by so fast. And I'm looking around in my room and it's halfway packed up. So I'm going to be closing two chapters and opening up two more chapters in a couple of months. And I'll explore that a little more. But I had been going back and forth as to whether or not I should do an episode, a closing out episode for the last season because if you've noticed, I do talk a lot when I have a guest on the show, and I tend to interrupt them because I get excited. That's just my general personality. But I didn't want to be the person that was just talking about herself for 45 minutes and bore you guys to death. So I have broken out this episode to talk about things that I know some people are curious about. But secondly, I also wanted to address some questions that came up during one of my workshops that I did at my old high school with a group of high school students. They had a whole bunch of listener letters, and I want to address some of those letters today. And I felt it was important for me to kind of wrap up, the podcast and give you guys a little bit of my experience because I am meeting more and more podcasters, and everyone has a different style, different equipment, different kind of theme for their podcast. Each unique, but each of us are in the same playing field with similar struggles. And I'm so grateful to have met a lot of people who have podcasts, and I can't wait to see where this podcast grows. You know, back in, I want to say October of 2017, when I decided I wanted to do a podcast, I was super nervous because I'm not a really good speaker. I'm actually pretty insecure about the way that I speak. I assume that people are judging me because I don't say words that clearly and I don't sound really intellectual when I talk, despite the amount of schooling or the amount of time, the long, what am I trying to say? The amount of time I've spent in school, I still don't feel like I can articulate myself as much. I don't know if it's because I'm bilingual, but I know that my confidence and my insecurity about speaking to people is definitely a factor. So I knew that this podcast would definitely, push me to get better at speaking in public. And I knew that it would also give me an opportunity to gain a little bit of confidence, for myself because I'm someone who has lacked a lot of confidence. Even though I talk a lot about it on social media about how it's important to love yourself and stuff like that, I'm honestly talking to myself because I struggle with that. So when I started the podcast, I had, a great team that was with me, and it's been a beautiful, beautiful experience, the podcast. We had we had a lot of successful episodes. I wanted to kind of talk about some of them. So I looked up the stats for some of the episodes, and the top episodes that some people liked were the Hurricane Maria episode, which is the episode where I'm talking to my cousin and we're kind of talking Spanglish about Hurricane Maria and how it really affected Puerto Rico. A lot of people know about what happened in Hurricane Maria because they watch the news, and some people had family in Puerto Rico. So I really wanted to interview one of my family members so they could talk about what they did during the hurricane and how it was for them. Another popular episode was the Black Girls Wear White Coats. And that was with two of my girlfriends, Sarah and Jaquel. They're both these two beautiful black women who are medical providers, and they drop some important gems about different things that people of color are experiencing in the medical field and ways that our needs are different than everybody else's needs. And I think the another episode that a lot of people told me about that they really liked was the Way Up I Feel Blessed episode, which is my friend Christine. Excuse me. So my friend Christine is a flight attendant and she's also a social worker. So she talked a lot about finding her purpose and how she struggled trying to figure out what is she good at. And it's hard to admit as an adult that you don't really know what you want to do with your life because when you're from the young age of like maybe 6 or 7 elementary school, you're asked what do you want to do when you grow up. There's like projects in school that require you to pick what you want to do when you grow up, and it already forces you to pick something or to strive for something. That thing changes so many times as you get older, and still, even when you're a senior in college, you're still trying to change your mind about what you want to do, and you're wondering if what you're going to do is going to make you money, because at the end of the day, we're trying to make money. So Christine goes into that a little bit. When it came to the podcast, I really, really wanted to do a podcast where I was focusing on people of color and wellness. So I wanted to focus on the fact that people of color, black, brown people should be taking care of themselves, practicing self-care, taking care of their health. But that subject is talked about in so many different podcasts. And yes, there is a lot to talk about with self-care and wellness, but I found myself struggling. I found myself grabbing at straws when it came to what to talk about with wellness because yes, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, but I was having a hard time finding other people of color who were in the field of wellness, not just therapy, because I know a lot of black and brown therapists. I'm talking about black and brown, nutritionists, black and brown yoga instructors, black and brown people who focus on like meditation and crystals. And so I wanted to cover so many different topics in season 1, but I could not find a lot of people who were experts in their field around wellness and self-care. So I decided I wanted to integrate interviewing people of color with small businesses, because another interesting thing about where the podcast is recorded, which is in Hartford, Connecticut, is that Hartford is popping up with a lot of cool businesses. So I thought, oh, well, let me try to interview these folks for the podcast because A, I want them to have exposure. B, I want people to know that Hartford is up and coming. So it was a 2-part thing, whereas like 1, I wanted to focus on wellness for people of color because wellness and self-care has been a big part of my mental health journey. And I wanted to interview people who had a small business. And I can say that I was somewhat successful because I interviewed a lot of people who had small businesses, and I've gotten great feedback about some of the businesses that I had. A lot of you were really excited about Refurnish CT, which are Vanessa and Troche. Alex and Vanessa Troche. They own Refurnish CT. A lot of you were excited about hearing the episode with Story and Soil. A lot of you were excited about Lifer Fitness. Deborah Fountain, she's the owner of Lifer Fitness. I interviewed a yoga instructor, a Vasu tribe, which is a tribe in Hartford. So I was able to cover that. And in terms of the wellness stuff, I was able to cover some stuff from wellness, but I can honestly say that I was a little rusty. So I find myself also kind of interviewing people that fit in the category of love and life. So if you see the tagline that I have, an intimate conversation with friends about love, life, wellness, and everything in between. So we did a little bit of stuff around like love, life, like financial literacy, intimate partner violence, dating. We talked about DACA and being a writer, living in a, predominantly Latino society, or sorry, household, and in a predominantly white environment. So, it was, I really, really enjoyed all of my guests that were on the podcast. Honestly, the podcast would not be as successful if it was not for my friends. At least 90% of the people on the podcast I knew, and they were my friends already. And I could say 100% of the people on the podcast now are my actual friends. I love each and every one of you that were on the podcast. And if you're listening, thank you so, 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 so much. I am so happy that you were able to be on the podcast and contribute to it, because I don't know what I would have done without it. One of the things that kind of so those are some of the positive things about the podcast, that a lot of people liked it. I had friends who, one of my friends, her name is Iriana. Shout out to you, boo. She told me, "Oh, I really love this episode." And I had other friends go up to me and ask me stuff, and I had people go up to me in stores and mention the podcast. So it was pretty cool to have people that I don't even know see me in the store and mention the podcast, and people who don't listen to podcasts, like my girl Iriana, grab something from it. And at the end of the day, even if the name of the podcast and the theme, maybe the guests, maybe they're all over the place, they're not as organized, at the end of the day, I wanted all of you who listen to the podcast to get something out of it. So I promise to be a little bit more organized about season 2, but at the end of the day, I wanted you guys to get something out of it. I wanted to also address some of the things that, were kind of lows about the podcast. So starting a podcast was interesting because a lot of people who know me were confused as to why I was starting a podcast. They assumed that I just wanted a platform so I could talk about myself, which is, it's neither is here nor there. That's their opinion of me. It was really, really, I had to do a really good job of setting up boundaries and saying no, because I had people who I barely talked to, talking about, I want to be on your podcast and this is what I'm going to contribute to it. And that's when me being unorganized about the podcast kind of came into my head, because there were people who, they were not people I would ever have on the podcast. Not because of who they are or nothing like that, but what they're doing and what they're about does not align with the podcast. And they wanted to be on it just because they felt like, well, I have a following on social media, so you should have me on your podcast because then you'll get a following. So it was really hard for me to say no to people who I know about, because, to be on the podcast, because I felt like I was insulting them. But it was even harder to say no to my friends. A lot of my friends wanted to be on the podcast, and I think that they thought that the podcast would be an opportunity for them to, quote unquote, go off or vent about something. No. I did not want that to be this kind of podcast. This is not the kind of podcast where we talk about political stuff. I think that we mentioned y'all's little president probably less than a handful of times. We do not talk about political stuff in the podcast. We do not talk about pop culture in the podcast. We talk about some stuff, but it's like we kind of graze through it. I won't do a whole episode about what Kanye West doing or what Kim Kardashian is doing. It's not because I don't want to do that, but that's not what my podcast is about. If you want a podcast where you want to talk about, pop culture or sports or political views, there's plenty of podcasts and I can refer you to. So that's not what my podcast is about. I wanted it to be a podcast where it was light and people got something out of it, and I was producing something that I was proud of. And the reason why I think I ended the podcast so early in June is because I stopped being proud of it. I started getting so much backlash about the podcast, and it was really, really hard for me to take on because I didn't know how to handle it. Yes, I have an editor. Yes, I have someone who does my music. My music guy, Mike, he is busy. He just got married. Congrats to you and Liz, by the way. Gabby, she's my editor, but she has a million tasks going on. So at times I felt like I didn't have no one to go to about the podcast. So it was hard for me to really see the future of this podcast. I really did not think that I could do a season 2. A part of me still thinks that. I had a really tough time, again, with the purpose of the podcast. I had two friends tell me that, the name of the podcast, Basic Latina, didn't make sense for the purpose of the podcast. And I kind of agreed, but like I wanted to know what they were talking about. So I'm like, okay, what do you mean by that? They're like, well, you interview a lot of black people, and I assume as a Latina that I would hear more Puerto Rican people. And this is probably like February, February or March. And I was like, oh, um, what do you, I have bunch of Puerto Rican people that I interviewed. So far, I've only interviewed black people. I said, well, I'm doing stuff in a certain way. And I said, February is Black History Month. So that's probably why you think there's a lot of black people on there. And they're like, yeah, but your podcast is called Basic Latina. And as a Latina, I don't feel like I can relate to your podcast. And you to refer to people as people of color. And me as a Latina, I don't refer myself as a person of color. So this whole debate went on between my friends and I. And it was hard for me to hear that feedback because I'm already self-conscious about the podcast. When other podcasters listen to my podcast, I'm like on edge about what they're going to tell me. And I know where the flaws are in my podcast. First of all, I am recording in my room. So this sound is probably terrible. I'm sure that you can hear the little kids outside up the block yelling. Pretty soon you're going to hear my mom and my aunt burst through the door screaming my name because that's what Puerto Rican people do. And a lot of the times I was recording in a coffee shop or something like that. I don't have a studio. And I don't have anyone funding me. And I don't have the coins to make this podcast my full-time job, or at least make it something where I have a better situation where I can have a location and I have sponsors and all that other stuff. So, and I'm not complaining. I'm just saying that we're in the first stage of the podcast. We've only had a little over 20 episodes, and I'm grateful for those 20 episodes, but I needed to say that because it's been something that has been on my mind, and it was feedback that it was hard for me to hear, for sure. But overall, I feel like I had some amazing experience on the podcast. Like I said, sound was always an issue. I recommend that if you have a podcast, that please, please, please do your research about sound. Do not be like me and try to record on location at all these fancy places because it's going to be a problem. I really wanted to be authentic. So if I was recording in a yoga studio, I would go to a yoga studio. If I was recording a yoga instructor, I would go to a yoga studio. If I was recording a coffee shop owner, I wanted to record in his coffee shop. But what I later realized is that, okay, you're recording inside of a yoga studio that's huge, has tall ceilings, and you're barely going to hear the person. And, then I'd record in a coffee shop during rush hour, and you could barely hear the person. So I was trying to be as flexible as I could with my guests, and I went to them. So I have this little snowball microphone that I pull out. Sometimes I would have a lot of microphone issues. Sometimes you would have to record straight out of my laptop, which is what I'm doing now. So hopefully in season 2, we will have oh my God, it's my doorbell ringing. I'm just not going to get it right now. Hopefully in season 2, we will have a studio. So back to my home that I'm moving into. I'm moving in a couple of weeks to another place in Hartford, an area that I'm really in love with. And I am so in love with this apartment. I feel like it's going to be like part of my glow up for 2018. 2018 has been amazing to me. But I feel like this apartment is just everything that I've dreamed of, that I've wanted. And I'm anticipating and expecting so much. And you know what? That's okay. This is something that I look forward to. So with this apartment, I'm going to have my in-home studio. For those of you who have an in-home studio, hit me up because, again, I'm going to turn this into an in-home studio and I'm going to do my Googling, but I will definitely need your help. Shout out to my editor, Gabby. She, let me know about these mics. So far I have mics. I have to get a mixer. So I'm kind of developing my home studio, but I'm asking all of y'all if you have any suggestions on how I can make my home studio happen. Let me know. I'm happy to host. I'm going to be really happy to host guests in my new home in hopefully in August. So right now it's June. When I move, I'm going to take a break from all the podcasting and everything. I need to have a creative break. With everything that I've mentioned so far, I feel like I need to sit down and do some soul searching for this podcast and make sure that this is still for me and make sure that I'm fulfilling my purpose and make sure I'm producing good content. I feel like season 1, everything was rushed. I wanted music right now. I wanted a logo right now. I needed to record right now. I needed everything to come out. I did everything in 2 months, which is crazy. Most people don't do that. So I'm going to change the format a little bit. The purpose of the podcast is going to be the same. The name is going to be the same. The music is actually going to change. I want the podcast music to be more representative of me. And that's where I'm struggling, is I don't know what that looks like or what that's going to sound like. I'm convinced that when I finally hear the music that I want, that I'll know that it's a right fit for the podcast. So the music is going to change. I'm actually working with a local artist called, her name is Linda Luz. She's amazing. And she's also creating the logo for the podcast. Because what I'm struggling with is that I don't feel like everything meshes. The music, the name, the logo, and the theme, I don't feel like everything kind of is cohesive and everything aligns. So for the month of July, I'm going to try to get myself in alignment with this podcast. Get the new logo, get the new music. I can't change the name because I just can't. That's just too much. But I need to change like the tagline. I need to be more intentional about my guests. So that will definitely change. Another huge change for the podcast is that I will have to edit the episodes on my own. So Gabby, my editor, has decided to kind of step away from her role as the editor, which I'm super sad about and super nervous about because I do not know how to edit this podcast. And she has been instrumental in keeping me organized and making sure that this podcast sounds really, really, really good. So she has faith that I can do it. But she's going to pursue other projects, and she is just a dope person that has a whole bunch of stuff going on. And hopefully she'll be creating her own podcast. And so it's just going to be me. So it's going to be a one-woman show again. Me producing, editing, speaking, hosting, and all that stuff. So that should be fun. I'm really, really nervous about that. But I think that one thing that this year has taught me is that, anything is possible. And in order for me to grow as a person, I really have to step out of my box. And doing this podcast forces me to step out of my box. Forces me to be out there more. I'm the kind of person that, yes, I'm friendly and I'm funny and I like to make friends. And, I'm always joking around and I'm always doing stuff. I really, really like to be low-key and not do anything. And not be out there like on social media and stuff like that. So this podcast forced me to be on social media. And I remember, this is going to sound so bad, but before this, I had a lot of people on my block list on social media because of different reasons from years and years and years ago. I had to like unblock all these people and I had to keep myself open. I had to be conscious of not being rude to people. I felt like everything that I did and said was going to hurt the podcast. And this is my baby. This is something that I really, really, really enjoy. As much as I have doubts about myself, this is something at the end of the day, it keeps me up at night because I want it to be amazing and perfect, but I want it to but it also gives me a lot of anxiety because I want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. So, with all that being said, I want to get into some of the listener letters that some of the kids sent me, and they sent me over 50 questions. I was supposed to have my girl Sally on here to answer some of these questions, so I'm just going to answer a few because I still want her to go on here. So some of the questions that the students at Pathways asked me or wrote down for me are stuff that I already addressed in the podcast. Some of the young ladies asked me about my hair and what I do to it and curly things, which they can listen to the Curls I Do Adore episode. Some of the kids, or a lot of the kids, asked me about financial literacy. So you can listen to the financial literacy episode that I do with Kim. Some of the kids asked me about gender roles, and I did an episode with one of the kids at Pathways about gender roles. And a lot of the kids asked me about love. And honey, if you know me, you know I'm not an expert at love. My love life is a disaster, okay? And my friends are probably gonna be like, girl, Amneris, whatever, you're crazy. Like, no. My love life is a disaster. And I did an episode with a guy that I used to talk to, which went fine, but I'm a huge person. I believe in love and I want to get married and do the whole traditional stuff. And because I've gotten my heart broken millions of times, I have trust issues. So that's what I mean by my love life as a disaster, because I start talking to somebody and then it disappears very quickly. So that's why I think I pour myself into projects like podcasts and work and fitness and health and self-care, because once I pour my attention to love life and relationships and I get disappointed, I go in a depressive, dark place. And I start doubting my beauty, my brains, and my ability for someone to love me. So it is a tough subject for me. So I'm going to try to address some of the other light ones. So one of the kids asked me, on your first episode, were you nervous and has anyone doubted your idea of Basic Latina? Of course, I was nervous on my first episode. My first episode was recorded in this room, on the same bed, sitting just how I am sitting right now, but with my cousin next to me. And she's a high school student. So I knew that the first episode would be fun. And a lot of people actually gave me feedback on the first episode. So, I mean, good feedback. So I was nervous, but recording with her made it better because she's a lot of fun and she literally, like, everything rolls off of her shoulder. And obviously, like I mentioned before, I had doubts. People had doubts about the podcast. I had doubts about the podcast, and I still do. And that's just because I'm doubting myself, which I don't. Which brings me to the next question. How do you deal with self-doubt? I think having people around you who support you and challenge you are really, really important. So one thing is that yes, it's nice to have people who are your cheerleaders, but another thing is you have to have real friends around you who are going to tell you the truth. So people who are constantly telling me like, oh my God, Amneris, you're awesome and you did so good and you're a rock star and you're crushing it. That's awesome. But I need friends to tell me like, girl, wait a minute. That wasn't good. That wasn't as good. That wasn't your best work. Like you could have done this better. I need friends like that, and thankfully I do have friends like that. So when I have self-doubt, I will go to my friends. And I have I have a lot of friends, but I have a very, 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 very small amount of friends, probably like 3 people that I can go to who will give me the real deal when it comes to me doubting myself about relationships, career, money, my body, my weight, anything like that. So when you're dealing with self-doubt, make sure that you have a good team around you that you can check in with that are going to be real with you. And whatever it is that you need to do to fill up your cup, which I always talk about on the podcast, do that. So whatever you have to do for self-care to make yourself feel better so you could be in a good place, do that. And honestly, you have to listen to your body sometimes. So if you're feeling any self-doubt, literally try to do some mindfulness where you're just sitting and you're trying to figure out where your mind wanders and trying to feel how your body feels. It might be that you just need a break, that you're exhausted. And if you're doubting yourself, you need to check in to see what around you is making you doubt yourself. Are you on social media a lot? Are you comparing yourself to your friends? Do you have someone in your life that is putting stuff in your head about your doubt? So those are all of those factors will definitely contribute to you doubting yourself. But having things that you can rely on are going to be really, really important. So the next question is about what were some of my struggles doing the podcast. And I mentioned what some of the struggles were: sound, finding a location for the podcast, trying to make sure I maintain within the scope of the podcast. So those are my struggles. And again, Gabby, who was my editor, my friend, I considered her my partner in this podcast, did a good job of helping kind of unpack some of those struggles. And someone asked, how do you filter your content? I don't. So Gabby doesn't take out a lot from the episodes unless we ramble on. So if my guest and I, for example, I went to Vegas recently with one of my friends, but she was also on a podcast talking about her event planning business. On the podcast, we started talking about Vegas, and Gabby took it out because she was just like, the episode is already so long, and people don't really need to know that you went to Vegas or like you're going to Vegas. Like, yes, they care, but like, it's just like fluff, right? So she took that out. So we don't filter it in terms of like, oh, you can't, like, people can curse, they can say what they want. People have said problematic things on the podcast before. We don't do a lot of filtering on the podcast, and to this point, I haven't gotten a lot of feedback about it. I had a friend tell me that I curse too much in a podcast, and I just laughed about it because I'm like, I don't curse a lot at all, so I don't think that. So I do not filter my content. Um, let's see. This question. Oh, so another one about the podcast. So, what do you enjoy most about podcasting? The thing I enjoy most about podcasting are the people that I meet. I said that a lot of them are my friends, and some of them are. I said 90% of them are my friends. The other ones aren't, or I just met. I think the cool thing about the podcast was able to see my friends in a different light in a professional setting, being able to highlight their awesomeness because I already know my friends are awesome. And then the second part was meeting cool ass people in Hartford. I've met some really, really, really cool people in Hartford. If it wasn't for me walking into Story and Soil and talking to one of the guys, he introduced me to the owner. The owner was on my podcast. That guy, his girlfriend is the girl who's doing my logo for the podcast. So I feel like the podcast has opened the doors up for me to network and has allowed me to meet all these interesting people. So I think that's what I like most about it, is the networking and then meeting different people. Another question that's kind of related was, what obstacles have you faced to get where you are now? And now, I don't know if they mean now in the podcast or now in life. I feel like that's a whole episode, but I think that a lot of the obstacles that I have faced now that I'm reflecting has been me getting in my own way. My friends know that I tend to put myself down a lot, and it's really hard for me to say that publicly, but I put myself down a lot. Oh, I can't do this, or I'm not good at this, or I'm not going to even try that because I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to make it. That doesn't make sense. Like, it's always like I can't do something. So I feel like my biggest obstacle recently, now that I'm a grown woman and I'm trying to be more honest with myself, is that I am in my own way sometimes. My own way. And that's the biggest obstacle for me so far. Another teen asked, how hard is it to get a job as a person of color? I think that a lot of people have a different opinion about this, but I feel like things are a little better, and it honestly depends. That question really depends on the area that you're in, the kind of field, area as in zip code or state or city. I think it depends on what field you're in and like what kind of job you're applying for. A lot of people like say, like, jokingly, first thing that popped into my head was, if you have a name that's difficult to pronounce or a name that seems quote unquote ghetto, I'm using air quotes, that might make it difficult for you to get a job. So that's one thing that is obvious that people always talk about that came up in my head first. Someone like myself, who my name is Amneris, which to me doesn't sound bad, but I'm always getting it mixed up. I've always wondered, like, has that stopped me from getting a job? But I think depending on the shoes that you fill, whether you are a man of color or a woman of color, those experiences can mirror each other, but they're probably different. But again, it depends on your demographic, the area that you're working in and the field that you're going into. Because you may have a better chance getting a job if you're a person of color in a predominantly black or brown community where you're working in the community, as opposed to maybe a black or brown person trying to work on Wall Street when there's all these white faces around you. So I imagine if there's more people like you in an environment, then you're more likely to get the job. Or if you get the job and there's white faces around you, you're only getting it because you're adding color to the spectrum, which is a whole different conversation. Okay, so this question I thought was interesting. So someone asked about, whether, hmm, oh, sorry. So someone asked, whenever you do something during the day, do you reflect on it? And I wish that I knew who wrote this because I want to ask them to elaborate. But yes, I reflect. I have a journal, which people laugh at me when they hear that I have a journal. But I have a journal. I just recently started a gratitude journal because, like I said, a couple minutes ago, I'm really negative and sorry, not really negative, but I'm really down on myself sometimes, and I can be negative. So before, I would write in my journal about all the shitty things that happened to me throughout the day and how I need to do better the next day. And I realized, like, man, I do not want to go back. This is not good energy that I'm putting out into the universe. So I started journaling about the things that I'm grateful for. So I definitely do reflect on the day, and I try to reflect on something that happened, whether or not it was good or bad, and maybe how I can improve and how I feel about it and how I can make it better the next day. But I always try to end my journal entry or begin my journal entry by saying what I'm grateful for. So I could say I'm grateful for having this conflict with my friend because her and I were able to address something that has been on both of our minds, and now our friendship is stronger because of it. So I think it's the wording, but I think it's important to reflect on those things because that's important. Some people asked about Hurricane Maria and how I feel about how do I feel about the U.S. barely helping the victims of Hurricane Maria. I had a whole episode with my cousin who was impacted by Hurricane Maria, so I encourage you to listen to that. And honestly, my feelings haven't changed. I feel like we did a really shitty ass job, and I think that it's important for us to help our own. And Puerto Rico is our own. Puerto Rico is U.S. territory, and as much Puerto Ricans that there are in the U.S., I feel like it's such a shame. But with y'all's little president in office, that wasn't gonna happen. So I'm not surprised by the U.S.'s reaction to Hurricane Maria because look at how they treated the folks in Texas, or look at how they treated the people in New Orleans when that hurricane happened. So Puerto Rico was no different. I'm not surprised. Another question that I thought was interesting was, what are some mistakes that I regret? Whew, I feel like I spend a lot of my I spend a lot of my time doing what ifs. Like, man, I should have done this and I should have done that. So I don't think I feel like regret is like a strong word, but okay, but this is about mistakes. Okay, so I've definitely done things. So yes, I have done things in my past I am not proud of. I'm pretty sure that I mentioned in one of my episodes how I used to, how in the past I was a side chick, which some hesitation to say that. But most of my friends, most of the people that I've talked to romantically, and most of the people hopefully who listen to this podcast have heard that. There was a time in my life when if a guy liked me and I liked him, I didn't care that he was with somebody else. And I know that sounds bad, and we can have a discussion offline about it, but I wasn't like this savage person that was, taking other girls' mans, and I had no respect for myself or other people. It wasn't about that. It was much more deep-rooted, and it's hard because I want to elaborate on it, but I feel like I'll go on, and I really don't want to because I feel like it's better if I have this discussion with someone in a dialogue rather than with you guys who can't respond. So, but yes, I have definitely made mistakes that I regret. That's why I have forgiven myself for those mistakes and moved on because that is the only way that you could do that. Another question I got was whether I was bullied in high school. So I actually talk a lot about being bullied in middle school amongst my friends. So I always joke that I was like bullied all my life, but I was bullied a lot in middle school. So this is related to the last question. I was an 11-year-old girl who hit puberty super early and grew boobs and a butt overnight. I think that it was like the summer before 7th or 8th grade that I grew boobs in a butt, and I went to school that September, and everyone was looking at me, and I felt so uncomfortable. I'm almost 30 now, and I still get the heebie-jeebies when somebody's looking at me and my body because I can tell, and it freaks me out. I was like that when I was in 7th and 8th grade. Imagine being in 7th grade and having the body of a woman. I had grown men. Me and my sister are 6 years apart. I had like boys in high school, and at that time I thought it was cute and stuff, but now that I think about it, I'm like, that's so fucking gross. So I had grown men look at me. I was walking from home to school and back again and stuff like that, and that's when I first started realizing that like guys hang out of their car to talk to girls. I thought it was so gross. So because I was developed, boys would try to talk to me, so I had a lot of boyfriends. Not a lot at the same time, but back to back. So I would be dating one guy for a little bit. And hello, like dating in middle school is not really dating. You literally see each other in school. You write notes to each other. Maybe you kiss outside in the park. And then you have to both be in the house by lights out. I had a curfew and I couldn't be on the phone. So I was on the phone maybe for like 30 minutes at night. And I had to be in bed doing my homework and showered and everything. At that time, both of my parents were living together. We were all living as a family, and I could not be just bopping around with all these boys. So yes, I would have like one boy, I'd talk to him for a little bit, we break up, and then I talked to another boy, he was cute. So I was like always talking to boys, and I was always with boys. So of course, rumors were spread about me that I was having sex with boys, that I was having, performing oral sex on boys, things that were not true. I didn't have sex until I was well into college, which a lot of people don't know that about me, but hey, we do not filter on this podcast. So I distinctly remember that it was the summer before high school, and I was at Riverfest. And for those of you who are from Connecticut, you already know what Riverfest is. Everybody shows out at Riverfest looking super cute. And I had a little two-piece like outfit, like shorts and like a little crop top. And I've always been a little, not chunky, but I've always been thick, borderline chunky. And my stomach always pokes out. That's just like genetic in our family. Like everybody's stomach pokes out. My stomach was poking out, and this girl I went to high school with saw me, and she said, hey girl, da, da, da. She was like, oh my God, are you pregnant? You look pregnant. And I was like, no, I'm not pregnant. And back then, I wasn't the witty person that I am now, and I didn't make a joke out of it. I was just like, no, I'm not pregnant. Well, she told everybody that I was pregnant. So freshman year of high school, I didn't even know anyone in my high school, and everyone thought that I was the freshman that was pregnant. So yes, I was bullied in middle school. And that kind of quote-unquote bullying of being sexualized kind of rolled into high school because people could not believe that I was a virgin based on how I looked and the people that I hung out with. And the things that I did were neither here nor there because I don't think it's okay for you to label a woman just because of her actions. And I tell this all the time to the high school kids that I talk to. I'm like, even the high school kids that I work with now, they always come to me and say, oh, I heard a rumor that this girl was talking about me, or I heard a rumor that this guy does this. I said, you need to ask that person yourself, because someone who suffered for years, middle school and high school, with rumors spread about her, I guarantee that 90% of the things that you're hearing is not true. So if any high school kids are listening to this, those rumors that you're hearing, most likely they are not true. If you did not hear it from their source, rumors are rumors, and that's it. Do not spread them, and do not get yourself in trouble. I want to answer a few more because I know that I've been talking for a long time, and I don't want to tire anybody else out. I think... Okay. So I got a couple of different questions about how to get smarter and healthier and overall glow up in general. I'm going to direct you to a few resources. If you are on Instagram, there are a couple of bloggers that I really enjoy. So one of them, her name is Farah Pink, Farahpink. So Farah and then Pink. She's a blogger who talks a lot about like beauty and hair and health and all that other stuff. She's great because she gives a lot of awesome tips. And then it's also Melanie, Melanie Santos, Santos .co. So Melanie Santos.co talks a lot about self-care and wellness on her Instagram as well. I think that we need to do a better job of using social media for what it is, and it is connecting and meeting people. And there's a lot of bloggers and influencers out here who are talking about how to get healthier and smarter. So those are two women that have a good start. There's also, I think that by getting smarter, you should start, reading books. I know so many high school kids that do not like to read, which is such a travesty because reading opens the doors to so many things. And honestly, that is one of the biggest ways that you're going to get smarter is by reading. And I mean reading articles by, credible news sources, even if they're short articles online, reading articles that maybe your teacher gives you, doing your readings for school. So making sure that getting smarter, quote unquote, is you have to continue to, to grow as a learner. I mean, to be like a lifelong learner. So for kids or, people who are not in college, it's reading what's assigned to you, doing your homework, developing good study habits, and finding things that you like to read. So that's why I say start with articles that you like. Google, even if it's like sports articles or football books, or maybe it's technology books or whatever. Find something that you like to read, even if it's magazines and anime. So read, read, read. I encourage you to read, 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 read. And if you're an adult and you're like, I don't have time for reading, podcasts are amazing because podcasts not only gives you a chance to stay current with what's going on, it also gives you, like, every single podcast has something you can take away with. So it's either like a new restaurant or a new way to do something or some way that you can improve your lifestyle. So there's so many different podcasts. So I feel like I've gotten much, much smarter about my life and what I do because of the podcast that I follow. And there's also audio books as well. So that is, for me, tips on ways that you can get smarter. It's so crazy because I'm looking over some of the questions and you guys have so many questions about love. And man, it just makes me so sad because I know that there's so many kids out there who are struggling with like broken hearts and lost relationships. There's so many questions that I have written down from kids who are dealing with on and off relationships, and how do you know when you're in love, and what do you do when the person that you love broke your heart? Because I know, girl, I was right there with you. Like I got my heart broken so bad in high school, and I feel like that's the where it hurts the most, when you're in high school and you have no idea what to do with yourself because you don't know how to cope with it. So maybe I might have to do another episode on love because it is definitely a subject that's on my mind a lot, and I know it's on yours as well. But I want to end by two questions that are very similar, but I think are important and are a good way to end. And those are, what encourages you to become who you are, and what encourages you to do what you do now? I think what encourages me to be the person that I am now is what I have been through. I have been through a lot. I mean, everyone has been through something. For me, I have been through a lot, and I feel very resilient that I am still standing. And things that I've been through that I will never mention on this podcast, and there's things that I'm very happy to talk about in the podcast, but I think based on what I've been through, looking back at my life and the people I had in my life and seeing my family struggle, seeing some of my family members do, I think seeing the movements of people and how they are and what happened to me in the past has encouraged me to be the woman that I am. I want to just be a woman who has a successful, peaceful, beautiful life that she is proud of. And I feel like I'm getting so close to that. And I think that I've strived so much for happiness in my life. And I think a lot of people will strive for happiness. And it looks different for everyone for so long. And I'm still trying to find it. So I think I've dealt with depression, anxiety, loneliness, sadness for so long that I just finally just want to be happy. So I think wanting to rise up from what I've been through has encouraged me to be the person that I am now, and has encouraged me to do what I want to do now. I'm a podcaster, but also I'm a therapist. I wanted to do social work since I was in high school. I always tell the story about how I used to like help my mom translate things. Like, she would get letters in the mail in English, or people would come to our house and ask this stuff. And so in the beginning, I wanted to be a social worker and like translate for people, like help people who are immigrants and who just came to the country and they don't know how to navigate things. So kind of like a case manager. But then I went to college, and I learned about like individual and family therapy and trauma and how it affects you as an adult if it doesn't get addressed, and there's all these different things, and drug and alcohol counseling, and intimate partner violence. I learned about all these different layers of social work, and I was like, wow, this degree is awesome because I get to do all of these things that are all different, but can all fit under social work. So finally, I feel like I'm in a place now where I'm actually like helping people. Because a lot of jobs in social work, you often don't feel like you're helping people because you have to produce a certain kind of numbers. And my friends who are social workers and therapists know exactly what I'm talking about. You have to do paperwork and produce a certain amount of numbers in order to get paid or to get money for the company. And you have to see a certain amount of clients, and you can only see them at a certain amount of time. And you can only do this and you can only do that. There's a lot of restrictions while it's a broad field. So I think knowing what I struggled with and then knowing that other people struggle with the same things, I wanted to help people. And especially, oh man, I have a soft spot for teenagers. I really, really do. I think women, children, teens, adolescents, like that whole group is just, it makes my heart hurt because I was one of those super, super lost teens. And I wish that I could go back and tell my middle school and high school self what I know now, and tell little Amneris, like, you're going to be fine. Relax. Because I was a super anxious, super depressed kid. So I think that knowing that and being that person has allowed me to think, well, if I'm struggling through it, then everybody else definitely is. So I work with a lot of kids now, and I work in the school system. And I'm a therapist, and I get to work with kids and families, couples, adults, everyone. But I feel like I'm really honestly doing what my purpose is. And I think that second layer is the podcasting. I wanted to make sure that I put Hartford on the map because I'm from Hartford. I wasn't born here. I was actually born in Puerto Rico, but I was raised in Hartford. And I came back to Hartford after going to grad school, and I was actually... at first, I was like, oh man, I don't really want to come back to Hartford because there's nothing to do. But then I was pleasantly surprised because Hartford has shown me in the past 2 years how much is glowed up. So my second purpose, or second thing that kind of encouraged me to do the podcast was to put Hartford on the map, to let everybody know that we're here to stay, and to put people of color on a platform. Because often when we're put in the spotlight is because of something negative. So I wanted to kind of change the narrative a bit and put us on the spotlight for something positive. So, guys, that is the last episode of the Basic Latina Podcast, Season 1. I thought that I was going to cry, and I almost did back there when I was talking about relationships because I'm going through something right now, and it is really tough, and I need to unpack it in a different time. But I really, really hope that you guys enjoyed the Basic Latina Podcast. I am so excited for Season 2. Like I said, I'm gonna be editing the podcast myself, doing all the producing and everything myself. The logo will be new. The music will be new. I have the logo already, but I don't have music. So any of you who want to make some music for the podcast, let me know. Hit me up. Please hit me up in the DMs or in my email. You could find me on Instagram or Facebook, Basic Latina Podcast, or you can send me an email, basiclatinapodcast@gmail.com. If you would like to give me advice on what equipment to get in my home studio, I welcome that. Slide through the DM, send me an email. Same thing with the music. I'm desperately looking for somebody to make some music for me. And if you think that you would like to be on the podcast or help me with the podcast, or if you have a guest for the podcast, please let me know. Yes, I'll be taking a hiatus from the podcast for the month of July, but I'm going to be hitting the ground running. And all because I'm taking a hiatus does not mean that I'm not out there networking and stuff like that. I just need to get to a place where I need to get in a more creative place with this podcast. So please, please, please hit me up, y'all. I really, really appreciate everything that you've done for me this far. 2018 has been a blessing, and I cannot be more grateful for all of you that were on the podcast, for everyone who worked on the podcast. I wish that there was another word for grateful, which I'm sure that there is. But right now, I'm at a loss for words. And I'm filled with feelings. Oh, how can I forget? In order to celebrate the season 2 of the podcast, we're going to have a party. So season 2 of the podcast will start in September. And we're going to have a party September 29th in Hartford at the Dirt Salon. The Dirt Salon is on Bartholomew. September 2019 is a Saturday. It's a free party. There's going to be food, cash bar. I'm going to be there talking to y'all. There's going to be some small businesses, some vendors. There's going to be a DJ. It's going to be like a little networking event / party. You could dance, you could drink, you could, eat. So I hope you guys will be at the party. I would love to meet all of you in person. Peace out. Love you all. Stay well and take care.